one thing that I have been curious, this is the one thing I decided I'd try to figure out for this episode. When did the message people generally stop celebrating Christmas, and where did the influence to do that come from? Like, that was one thing I thought I'd, just look a little bit. And I don't have a definitive answer, but I believe that from what I can tell, the majority of people from Pentecostal and traditional Christian backgrounds coming into the message all still continued to celebrate Christmas. The prohibition against Christmas comes from Jehovah's Witness influence into the message, actually.
Yeah.
That is where those ideas come from. And as you know, there were a number of former Jehovah's Witnesses at the Branham Tabernacle and in other places, and we know they were incorporating Charles Taze Russell's writings into the formulation of latter rain doctrines. And so the latter rain side of things had a fairly strong Jehovah's Witness influence, actually. And it's actually those Jehovah's Witness influences that are really coming down strong against the celebration of Christmas. And I think that it's primarily that element of people that William Branham was catering to with his anti-Christmas remarks. Jehovah's Witnesses are really the only other, I don't know if mainstream's the right word, large group of professed Christians who actually prohibit the celebration of Christmas. They're really the only other ones out there that and do it in the exact same way that we do. They use the exact same verses against Christmas trees. They use the exact same verses to say this is not when Christ was born. They use the exact same logic that this is a teaching of Babylonian confusion. Like, they are the ones that use that language. And because the language is so similar and the rationales are identical, I really tend to believe it's primarily the Jehovah's Witness influence into the message that led to the widespread prohibition of Christmas.
Yeah, I think you're right. Their influence did have a deep impact on William Branham's theology, especially in the later years. I tried to also piece together, some of this history. This is a history podcast, so I'm trying to piece together history. It's really hard because when you have a man who is preaching one thing to one group and preaching another thing to another group and doing that, that's the only consistent thing in the message, is that there's inconsistency. So throughout time, you find, I'm against Christmas, I'm for it. You can't have it for your kids, but I'm going to have it for my kids. I like to see the little kids with smiling faces with presents, and those kids who are smiling faces with presents are celebrating the devil. I mean, when it's that wide variety, it's hard to pinpoint a time that the entire cult shifted. But if you take a step back from the Christmas, I think, this is my opinion, there's no way to prove this, obviously, but my opinion, during the early years of William Branham's ministry, when he was widely accepted into churches, it was an everyone is welcome, we're all Christians, let's join together as one. It was all a unity thing, and that started from the early years. You see it, 1945. He even says, if someone draws you out of their circle, draw a bigger circle and draw them back into it. So in other words, if they believe differently than you, let's just join together as Christians. We're building this movement. We're building this, I hate to say it, we're building this cult. So let's join everybody together. Well, over time, people started discontinuing fellowship with William Branham over heretical doctrines and white supremacy, etc. The height of which was, we haven't got to this history yet, and I'm like chomping at the bits, but the civil rights movement and the anti-integration of schools played a huge factor in what would become the message cult. And the climax of this was when William Branham's mentor and partner in various ways, Roy E. Davis, was in Dallas at the time that Kennedy was assassinated and was leading the protests against integration in the Dallas school system. Whenever Kennedy was assassinated, this massive federal investigation happened, and you can't say that it was because of this, but you can say that it was along with this. William Branham appears to have completely lost his mind around 1963. He had suffered mental health issues leading up to this, and he mentions it on recording. But in 1963, he's lost all of his support. The feds are really cracking down on Roy Davis and anybody connected to him, which would have included him. You've got, it felt like, literally to him, it would have felt like the walls are closing in. I'm losing all my supporters. I've got this little tight group of people. I'm just like Jim Jones, the government's against us, and we've got this little small unit. So around 1963, he starts to lose it, and that's whenever it becomes no longer a everybody's welcome religion. It's a let's preach against every single person who has discontinued fellowship with me, including Christians who celebrated Christmas.
Yeah, it really is something how it all kind of developed and built out, He was trying broad appeal, and as the years go by and his broad appeal dies, he tends to come to cater more and more to this loyalist core group that he has, right? And I think that, and we've heard this from quite a few people, as you come into these dwindling years, William Branham becomes more and more strident, more and more cultic, more and more extreme, right?
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with the people who are left with him. A lot of them are very extreme themselves.